Good evening, good morning, salam, welcome everybody to MACFEST 2026, to another special panel, to Muslim Converts panel. And we're going to hear about the lives and stories of our special guests today. Our host for today is Yvonne Ridley, British journalist, author and politician, former chair of the National Council of the now defunct Respect Party. She made global headlines when she was captured by the Taliban and held for 11 days back in 2001 after the events of 9/11. And Yvonne will be in conversation with two people whom you might remember from our previous events. Malik Al Nasir, an author and PhD candidate in history at the University of Cambridge and an associate of Cambridge Digital Humanities. His research explores the legacies of enslavement and colonialism, reparative justice, and the decolonization of archives. He's the author of Searching for My Slave Roots from 2025 and Letters to Jail 2021. He's co-founder, together with Leona Vaughan, of Barriers to Black Academia, a policy-focused initiative addressing structural inequalities in higher education. He's also the founder of the Sandbach Teen Project, an interdisciplinary research and public history initiative examining the commercial and cultural legacies of Sandbach Teen and Co. Malik is project manager of the Connector project in partnership with National Museums Liverpool and Lloyd's Register Foundation. And our second speaker for today that Yvonne will be in conversation with is Brogy, a journalist and an award-winning multimedia executive producer. She started in independent television production and has worked for all three media-owned Maverick TV, the BBC and BBC Worldwide. She was part of the launch team of ESI Media's London Live and moved on to become group head of video production for the Evening Standard and the Independent. She writes for Good Food and has contributed to the Telegraph. She's passionate about fostering new talent. She's a patron of the National Student Television Association and established the Mars Elkins L. Brogy Award for Multimedia Content. Mars is a member of the ITV Anglia Inclusion and Diversity and is HONSEC for the RTS East Committee and a member of the RTS Midlands Committee. Currently online publication Hyphens managing editor, Mars recently completed the HarperCollins Author Academy course and is the first cohort of the BBC YouTube NFTS Create Connect Digital News training program. She's due to hold her second TEDx talk in October at the University of Suffolk. So if you have any questions for today, or maybe you'd like to share any thoughts, insights, or your own experience, please put it in the chat for us or in the Q&A portal. We will pick it up and address towards the end of the event. So over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it gives me great pleasure to be a panelist again on MACFEST, which I think is it's obviously an annual event now, and I think it's going to become as significant as the Edinburgh Festival. It really it's a great honour to be here, and I've got two fantastic guests, Mars Brogy and Malik Al Nasir. And we all have something in common. We're all converts to Islam. And the first question I'm going to direct at Malik is what brought you to Islam? You know, because what a time to be a Muslim. We're facing intense geopolitical conflicts, rising global Islamophobia, and there are deep internal divisions making the choice to convert to Islam a path walked amid heavy public scrutiny and widespread misconceptions. So why did you convert, Malik? What prompted you?
It's great to be here, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everybody. And Yvonne, I am a fan of your work as well, I should say. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. For me, I reverted to Islam in 1992. So it was in the kind of pre-9/11 era, although, there were other geopolitical events going on where Muslims were being very heavily sort of targeted, the Bosnia genocide, and then shortly afterwards, the kind of Kosovan genocide. So there was a lot of sort of anti-Muslim hostility being directed towards our community around the time that I became a Muslim. But I did not seek to become a Muslim. My path was a quest for truth. So religion sort of came into the equation as a part of that, questioning, if you like. It wasn't seen as a sort of the destination of choice. I grew up in a household where my father was from Guyana in South America. He was a black nationalist. He loved Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Marcus Garvey. My mum was white Welsh. She was an atheist. She was primarily a communist. She thought Fidel Castro was going to solve the problems of the world. And at one point, she wanted us all to move to Cuba. So I grew up in a family setting that didn't have religion of any description. But at the age of 9, when my father tragically had a stroke and went into hospital and became a quadriplegic, he got paralyzed from the neck downwards. Shortly after that, I was taken into local authority care at the age of 9. So from the time I went into the care system, which was a very brutal experience between the ages of 9 and 18, I was shifted from one institution to another. And in each of those institutions, I was kind of forcibly, indoctrinated, if you like, with a variety of different Christian doctrines. One week, I could be in a Catholic church. Next week, I'd be in a Salvation Army. The week after, I'd be in a Wesleyan Methodist church. And that was very typical of the care system. At the time, we had a chapel in one of the homes that I was in for 4.5 years. And, school assembly every single day was a chapel service. So we had Christianity sort of beaten into us, literally beaten into us within those institutions. And I later sued those institutions in a 10-year litigation, which I was successful, and won a financial award and also a public apology for the time that I spent in the local authority care system. But at the age of 18, they spat me out onto the streets of Toxteth in Liverpool in kind of post-riot era, after the riots of 81. This is like now 1984. And they put me into a hostel for homeless black youths. Social services gave me £100 and told me to sign a form to say I'd never come back for any more money. So as a consequence of that experience, I was now destitute. I was homeless. I was semi-literate. I'd spent most of my time working on a farm rather than being in school. I hadn't had any secondary education, hardly. And as a consequence of that, I was destitute. And that year, 1984, I just fortunately happened to get backstage at a concert in Liverpool of a civil rights activist and poet called Gil Scott-Heron. And he met me, he took a shine to me, I cooked a meal for his band, and he decided to take me on the road with his band. And I ended up touring with him and worked with him for 27 years. And over that period, he kind of inculcated values in me around seeking knowledge, seeking truth. And that was really the start of my journey, which then led me to his mentors, who were the last poets. And the last poets were out of the civil rights movement. They started off as sort of Nation of Islam, kind of black Muslims. They'd realized that that was a false doctrine. They'd come to Orthodox Islam, and they'd use their poetry to promote civil rights. And Gil had been heavily influenced by them. So when I found them, I kind of, got to meet them as well. And it was Jalal Nuruddin from The Last Poets who actually introduced me to the faith of Islam. And he's the one who named me Malik. So I came to Islam. My route to Islam was through this kind of quest for truth, which ended up with a Muslim poet who was able to answer all my questions about life, the universe, religion, and everything else to my satisfaction. And that's before I even read the Quran. I took Shahada. And after I took Shahada, I started to read the Quran. And the autobiography of Malcolm X as well by Alex Haley was a very kind of definitive kind of link that really tipped the scales for me and made me feel that, yeah, this is definitely the way. It helped me to contextualize and understand the world as I saw it as a Black person growing up in a white world. And that was really the start of my academic journey. It was the start of my political journey. It was the start of my spiritual journey.
That is such a beautiful, fascinating story. And before I converted to Islam, I had read the Quran, but I do know of many people who have embraced Islam without reading the Quran. I met somebody who embraced the Quran just listening to the azan, the call to prayer. So did you then start reading the Quran after you'd converted?
Well, I did. Obviously, once I'd reverted, I felt, it's incumbent upon me to like read the book and really understand what is required of me, because that was the main thing. It was like, okay, now you know that this is the truth. You know that this is your creator. You know that you are in submission to his will. That was the Shahada. Now, what do you have to do? So the Quran obviously was the manual for showing me what I had to do. And immediately I started giving dawah, because one of the things that I was told at the very sort of beginning of my kind of Islamic journey was, if all you know is La ilaha illallah, teach that. So the first thing I did is, within a week of taking Shahada, I went to one of my friends and told him what I knew. And he was like, oh, I've been thinking about that too. And I said, well, you need to take Shahada because, you don't know if you're going to live or die tomorrow, So, Allah said, don't die unless you're a Muslim, unless you've said La ilaha illallah. So he was like, okay, take me to Jalal. So I took him to Jalal and he took Shahada, and he became Abdul Jabbar. So I started doing, giving people Shahada. It got to the point where I think I'd given like 50 Shahadas and I stopped counting. And then I started doing a whole range of different activities. I was working with people in the refugee community, because in the early 2000s, Tony Blair was in power, and he'd started dispersing refugees and asylum seekers around the UK, because he said there was too much concentration of them in London. This was part of his whole kind of xenophobic, kind of agenda, as it were. And within the context of that, Liverpool was allocated 2,000 asylum seekers per year. So, of course, at that time, we'd had the Bosnian genocide, the Kosovan genocide was ongoing. The first Gulf War had happened. You had the Kurds had been told to rise up against Saddam, and they'd been, abandoned by George Bush Sr. And the result of that was a massive migration of Kurdish refugees from Sulaymaniyah and various different places in Kurdistan. So what had happened in Liverpool had a city council that was a Liberal Democrat city council, and there was a Labour government. So when they did the dispersal policy around the country, they allocated 2,000 asylum seekers to Liverpool. Liverpool City Council refused to accept the deal, didn't sign a deal. So Tony Blair bypassed them and went directly to the private sector and bought 2 tower blocks in Everton, which was the whitest area of Liverpool. I mean, it didn't even allow Catholics in Everton. It was Protestants. And this is going back to the Irish potato famine. There's been this division between Catholics and Protestants in Anfield and Everton. And they just didn't have outsiders there. And these 2 tower blocks were scheduled for demolition, and he sold them to this Syrian woman for £1 per flat, and then proceeded to put 2,000 asylum seekers within 100 square meters of Everton. And these were people from Rwanda, from the Congo, from Kosovo, from Kurdistan, from Afghanistan. And these people had never seen anyone. They didn't even have Catholics, so, let alone like all these foreigners. Suddenly all these people speaking different languages and, being in this sort of scenario, in this community where they were just dumped there without any provisions. So I was brought in by Everton Development Trust to help them do some policy development and give business advice to the refugees, which I did. And we formed, as I said, Refugee Support Network. And in the context of doing that, A lot of them used to come into the development trust and they'd ask me for like various different things. I remember one guy from Kurdistan coming in and saying to me, how do you patent a design in this country? And I said, well, we have the patent office. If you bring me what it is that you'd like to do, I'll see if I can help you with it. And then he brought these plans and he rolled them out, and it was a system he developed for a fighter jet. And I was like, you know, these guys, there was diplomats, there was doctors, there was, you know, these people were, you know, artisans, intelligentsia, you know, and they were just shoveled into these £1 flats in this, you know, sort of rundown area, with dealing with all this hostility coming in from the communities. And some of them, particularly the ones that were coming from Kosovo, they were ethnic Albanians, and they'd never seen the Quran, because under, you know, communist rule, the Quran had been forbidden. So they'd grown up believing themselves to be Muslims, but didn't actually know anything beyond the cultural nuance what a Muslim was. And they'd never seen the Quran in their own language. And the Kurds couldn't get any books in their own language as well. And a lot of them had been kind of secularized, because through the process of fighting with Saddam, they'd refused to learn Arabic, and they demanded to, the Kurdish language is written in Arabic script, but they demanded to continue their schoolwork and so on in their Kurdish language in order to retain their cultural identity. And as a result,
so these refugees, these Muslim refugees, found Islam in Liverpool.
They basically they knew they were Muslims, but they'd lost their Islamic identities because they had no access. So one of the things I did was start to get books in Kurdish language on the basics of Islam, how to pray, how to make wudu, what the basic articles of faith. And the same, I got Qurans in Albanian language, and I started distributing it to these guys. So I found myself doing a whole range of different dawah activities, and then I managed to raise some money to organize a Hajj trip. So I started to take people who were reverts to Islam, not refugees, but the reverts to Islam, onto Hajj as well. So we did a bunch of Hajj programs, which we took about 50 people all total to Hajj and Umrah over a period of time. And then 9/11 happened. And as soon as 9/11 happened, all the funding stopped. Everyone was like, we're not funding anything to do with Islam, period. Shut it down, end of. That was that. So the dawah then became like a really kind of difficult thing to do, because, you know, you couldn't proactively promote Islam in any kind of way without being seen, you know, in a negative light by, you know, the powers that be, as it were. So that was kind of where I sort of came in and became more cognizant of the negative stereotypes and the historic sort of inaccuracies about Islam, really through that work and trying to do that and interfacing with those people and seeing how they'd had their Islam completely destroyed either by British colonialism in Iraq, and Kurdistan having been divided between Iraq and Syria and, you know, Armenia and Iran and Turkey. And then in the case of the Albanians, having their Islam completely and utterly stalled by the advent of communism in World War II. So I'm trying to reconcile all this in my head now as a Muslim, as a new Muslim, coming to Islam, reading the Quran, seeing all this wonderful stuff that the Quran tells you we should do, seeing this immaculate system of governance that should be deployed, and then looking at the geopolitical realities of how that had gone post 1918 and at the end of the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate, and where we ended up as a people to this day, which has got exponentially worse even since then. And really, it was a question of like how to work out what was Allah's plan for us, how this fits into that plan, and how that should strengthen, not weaken your faith.
Yeah. I'm acutely aware we've also got Mars Brogy on the panel, and I haven't spoken to her yet. I will come back to you, Malik. This is a fascinating story, and I'm sure that Mars has got an equally fascinating story to tell as well about her journey to Islam. And so, Mars, if you'd like to share with us what brought you to Islam and what happened subsequently.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm really honored to be in this amazing panel session. I'm just fangirling right now. I think I'm known to be a fangirl. I just get really in awe of people that I meet. Subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just, always been, generous with the people that I meet. And I suppose that was quite integral to how I found Islam. I grew up in a Catholic background, and I actually wanted to be a nun because I went to a Catholic school, a convent school, and I've always loved how the sisters were. And so I thought when I grow up, I would like to be a nun. However, as I get to speak to the aspirants and the nuns, they said that if to become a nun, you are not able to get married and not have children. So I thought at the time, I was about 9 or 10 years old. I thought I do want to have a husband and kids, like the usual things that are expected of you. And so I thought maybe not, maybe I can serve the Lord in different ways. And the household that I grew up in has always been a believer in God. So fast forward a little bit, when I got to university, I got to meet so many amazing people from Malaysia, from Pakistan, who showed me the beauty of Islam. They never rammed the religion down my throat. They just showed what a Muslim, what Muslims should be. So the modesty, the food, the lifestyle. And I thought that really resonated a lot with me. And so I thought, okay, so at university, it was then like I did start to think about, I love the religion that I grew up in. But for me, so I thought, okay, embrace Islam, and it's such a wonderful thing. And subsequently, I suppose, getting into the media, there were lots of challenges, I suppose. But I didn't wear hijab then. I was living it, but I wasn't wearing the hijab until I fully understood what it was all about, because I didn't want to backtrack and go like, oh, I didn't quite understand, so I'll take it off and then put it back on again type thing. So I thought I'll just see how I go and work on myself. But again, in my work, it was actually at the BBC when I got to work with two fabulous sisters, Iram and Fatma, and they really inspired me. And so one day, I went into work. I was wearing hijab, and they were almost in tears. And it was that feeling of being accepted and welcomed that really made me feel like, I've made the right decision. And then a few years down the line, again, I've met sisters. I would say sisters, although we're not sisters by blood. And actually, one of them is in this session now, Lulieta. I really miss. I really miss. There are people that you meet that really show you the beauty of Allah. Sorry.
Yeah,
In this
I know
world
exactly where you're
you know,
coming from. Mhm.
and that love that you get is Allah is there. It's like a malish to hold your heart, and uh, and that reinforces me to stay in this religion, because there are people that Allah just blesses you with. So yeah, sorry. This is very close to my heart. I never really talk about it a lot because I will be like this. And I know even there are people that I don't see now just because life has put us in different directions. With Islam, I feel we make dua each day too, and that keeps us connected.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mars, I've got a lump in my throat now, but you mentioned the hijab, and I noticed that you're wearing your hijab. When I embraced Islam, it took me about a year before I started wearing the hijab. But now I have to say, it's off more times than it's on. And Do you think that sometimes there's too much attention focused on the hijab in our faith that makes it
Absolutely.
difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are times when, especially within my career, where I thought, is this really all worth it? Because working in the mainstream, as much as, again, I've been lucky that I've met some great people along the way, there will always be challenges. And for a while, I thought, am I compromising something here? Am I compromising my faith, my values, just to be able to climb up that ladder? But actually, I tried to change my mind settings and think, it's like, it's tolerance. And I'm not going to lie, there are instances where I've been to certain places here in the UK where I know that there aren't many people of color or people like me. I've taken it off. And that's because I'm afraid, and especially if I'm with my mother and my children. And if it's just us and my father's not around or my husband isn't around, you know, and that makes me feel bad. But at the same time, I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will understand that, because He knows that my intention is purely because I don't want attention and then subsequently endanger my children and my mom.
It is a tough call because as sisters who wear the hijab, they immediately propel themselves into the front lines and are identifiable as Muslim women. And it is quite tough. And earlier you said that you had tinkered with the idea of becoming a nun. And there was one day I was traveling in the London Underground and I was going down the escalators and I saw a Catholic nun in front of me. So I hopped down a few steps so that I was right behind her. And I watched people coming up on the other side. And they were looking at the nun and they were just automatically smiling. And then I came into their eye line as the elevator went down and they just grimaced. And, the change in their face was instant.
Yeah.
And it was really, you can tell people, Christians who look at the statue of the Virgin Mary and they see the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
But then they look at somebody like me and see a hijab and they see a Muslim and suddenly the hatred, so I stopped wearing my hijab. Today I've got a bandana on and other days I'll wear a flat cap or a bucket hat or but I just feel sometimes that the obsession with the hijab from both men and women takes away the beauty of Islam when, there are to have somebody written off, not just for wearing a hijab, maybe the way they wear their hijab, the style of their hijab, we forever seem to be judged for how we wear our hijab. And then you get the good hijab, the bad hijab, the Benazir Bhutto hijab. She was forever pulling her veil from the nape of her neck. And we just seem to be constantly under the microscope.
Absolutely. And I think that's I'd like to think that that's where the test is, right?
Mhm.
And I think as a human, it's like, you have to just make decisions whether you kind of like go through with it or not. And then there are times, there are moments of where I just go, okay, I'm just not gonna, um, because I know when you feel really threatened. The other time that I did it was when we had the riots. If you remember, was it a couple of years ago? And they said, oh, the far right were already kind of just outside of certain shops, and I was so scared. And a couple of my friends, they're Muslims, but they don't wear hijab. They said, Mars, just take it off because you don't want to be a hot target. And I just went, you know what? It's true, and I did. But going back to your point, it is because we've been portrayed a lot, um, to be oppressed and all of these kinds of things, and associated with these tropes. Which I think, the media is obviously a very important tool, and that's why I do the work that I do, because I want people to see that this is a piece of cloth. I am saying that this is my identity, but at the same time, I'm also I know production, I'm a journalist, I can make programs and all of those kinds of things. So apart from being a Muslim, there's all of those kinds of things as well. And there are loads of things that we've got in common with, than what you think. So the more I'm out there and the more I'm with people, the more they will think, but actually, there isn't anything wrong apart from, they've just kind of listened to other things maybe. But like I said, I have been lucky because there are a lot of people out there that have opened doors, because they know exactly what people like us go through, right? And they go, okay, no judgments made. Let me give you this project, and it's amazing, and it's I'm here obviously because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time, He's given those people around me to give that opportunity. And my part of my work now is to give back and get those people that are emerging in the industry, to give them the guidance, to say this is how you navigate through this, because it's hard enough to break into broadcasting, right? uh and then you add this or you add something else, it makes it even, there are more barriers. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm here along with any other allies that we can have, and and you will be able to get to do what you want to do, or develop your passion, but at the same time not compromise on your faith or values.
Yes, I noticed that part of your media work involves the Islam channel. And of course, I used to work for the Islam channel, and the hijab was mandatory for presenters. But I've been told that it's now up to individual choice. I'm just wondering what the reasoning was behind that.
I'm not with Islam channel anymore, but when I was there, we actually created a new show for women called Salam Britain. And the thinking behind that was that it's a show for women by women. And it is exactly that, kind of addition that, Muslims obviously come in different shapes and forms. And so, the presenters that were had in there, they wore hijab or niqab, or didn't wear hijab at all, and it was a lovely mix of people. And from what I understand, they still have that show running, and it's still, I suppose, like, platforming Muslim women that would like to be in broadcasting and on television.
Yes. Well, it is interesting. As I say, it's something that during my first year as a Muslim, I was working in Qatar, for Al Jazeera, and I didn't wear a hijab then, and there was never any pressure put on me to wear a hijab. But I did have the zeal of a convert to Islam. I'd been a Muslim for a few months, and I remember I was whizzing around Qatar, and every time I saw somebody behaving in what I thought was an un-Islamic way, I would go up and challenge them. And I remember in Qatar airport in Doha, seeing a really angry looking Arab man grab an Asian boy and pull him over the desk and shake him, and I don't know what the problem was, but well, you know how frustrating travel can be these days. And he'd obviously been given some bad news, maybe his ticket or hadn't come through or something. And he was shaking this boy. And I saw this and just went over to him and said, "Brother, put him down." I said, "You shouldn't be acting like this. You know, what do you think our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what do you think he would say?" And he looked at me and he said, "What business is this of yours?" And I said, "Because I am your sister in Islam, and what you are doing is un-Islamic." He said, "Well, you don't look like a Muslim." And anyway, we parted, and hopefully I saved the young boy from a good hiding. I don't know. It was, but I thought about it, and I don't look like a Muslim. And then I thought, well, what does a Muslim look like? And of course, we're all colours, all nationalities, all cultures, so many different, you know, what doesn't. So I suppose even having for a brother to have a long beard means nothing now because of the hipster movement, where a lot of men are wearing long beards. So, but Muslim women are easily identified by a hijab. And you said earlier that about being a target. And in today's climate, there are no-go areas, I think, for Muslim women. And I think that is shocking, that we have come to a stage where we are walking targets. And this is what our politicians don't seem to understand. They will attack, and of course I'm talking about the right-wing politicians, they will attack Islam or Muslims, and then some idiot listening to them goes out of his front door, sees a woman in a hijab, and vents his anger on her. And that's what I mean by, you know, by wearing a hijab, we're thrust right into the front lines, short sword fighting in defense of Islam. And it is really sad. I used to love wearing my hijab. You know, to me, it was part of my uniform. It told the world that, you know, I am a Muslim woman, treat me with respect. And I do feel as though in civilized company anyway, you do tend to have a space around you that cannot be walked into as a Muslim woman. And that is people not even aware of it, but they're giving you a respect. And so I think that, yes, it's just one of those issues I don't think will ever be resolved. But I do get annoyed when brothers in particular, and I'll bring in Malik at this point, when brothers in particular express an interest or an opinion about women's dress, and I'll say, get out of our wardrobes. But yes, Malik, do you want to enter into this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that there's rukhsah in Islam for every circumstance. So there's dispensation for everything. So when you get into a situation where there is, hostilities, then you have to take into account the dangers and what needs to be done to mitigate against those dangers. So, for instance, if you're captured, as you were, Yvonne, and someone came to you and told you to renounce Islam or die, it's permissible for you to renounce Islam as from your mouth in order to save your life, as long as you do not renounce it in your heart. If you're in a situation where you're in the desert and you're going to die, and the only thing to eat is a wild pig, and you manage to catch that pig, you can eat it, even though it's forbidden, to eat pork. You have the right in that circumstance to eat it. You do not like it. When you find yourself in a situation where you can find an alternative food source, then you don't repeat the eating of it. You go and eat your alternative food source. But if it's in a situation where it has to be done in order to save your life, it becomes permissible. So the haram becomes halal in that situation. So is a principle, a basic principle in Islam of rukhsah, and it applies into all kinds of circumstances. For instance, circumcision for a male. Circumcision for a male is mandatory. However, when Bosnia reverted to Islam en masse, when the Turks invaded, they agreed to every single aspect of Islam except circumcision. And the emir at the time, who led the campaign into Bosnia, and this time they were all Christians, he gave a fatwa to say that no man above puberty would be required to have the circumcision if he took Shahada, but every child beneath puberty should have it. And they agreed, and that's how Bosnia became a Muslim country. So when you consider all of these things, whether it's something as as personal as circumcision, whether it's something as personal as hijab, or even your life, in terms of the whole of your Islam, for your life and your soul for the hereafter, all of those things have rukhsah attached to them in circumstances. So when you consider the circumstances that we find ourselves in today, where what happened in World War II to the Jews by the Nazis, those Holocaust survivors of Eastern Europe, the Zionists, have now weaponized those same Nazis and directed them at Muslims on the basis of, can you take what you did to us in 1939 to 45 and do it to the Muslims instead? I will pay you for that. And they are propagating that, they are financing that, they are facilitating that, whether it's Tommy Robinson, whether it's, Donald Trump, whether it's, Nigel Farage, they're all being financed from the same sources. And they're all being, promoted in the same way, and they're having these conventions, and it is very much being propagated in that way. So all these manifestations of hatred that are coming up towards Muslims all have the same root: the weaponization of these far right against the Muslims by the people who themselves were the victims of those same fascist ideologies. So we are living in that circumstance. So when my daughter comes to me and says, I don't feel comfortable wearing hijab, I'm not going to tell her to put a target on her back and walk out in the street when Tommy Robinson's marching in Liverpool. Because that would be irresponsible for me to do that in that circumstance. So my understanding of Islam as a kind of layperson who came to this without all the cultural baggage of being a Somali or a Bengali or a Pakistani or any of that kind of stuff, where it's been ingrained generationally, into you as to how women should be, how men should be, how elders should be, how younger should be. I'm just looking at Islam from the cold light of day. The day I picked up the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, what does it say? And then when I picked up the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and what did he do? And what was the context in which he lived? And how did he behave in each of those contexts? And I pick up, a tafsir of Quran of Ibn Kathir, and I start to look at how he interpreted it. So those to me just tell me how you should behave in those circumstances. People who have cultural traditions which are deeply ingrained generationally, will ignore that jurisprudence and will go directly towards their cultural nuance and then try to enforce the culture over the religion. And this is where that dichotomy begins. And when you start to try and propagate the culture over the religion, this is how you end up conquered as a people. This is how the Muslim world fell apart. This is how the caliphate collapsed, because of these cultural nuances. Simple principles like asabiya, grouping together along tribal lines. You talked about being in the Gulf, Yvonne. You've been in Qatar. I'm sure you've been across the Emirates and Saudi and those kind of places. Everything is Kabila. Everything. If you go in Somalia, if you're from Harwiya, you can't marry Darut. If you're from Darut, you can't marry Ishaq. If you're in Sudan, you can't marry Halfawiya unless you're from Halfa. There's all of these things in Riyadh. If you're from Najd, you can't marry someone from the Hijaz. It's pathetic. It's ridiculous. It's un-Islamic. All of this. Bengalis and Pakistanis very rarely intermarry as well. And at one point, they were all, before the British arrived in the partitions of 47, they were all one people. You could travel in the time of Ibn Battuta. You could travel from Timbuktu to China and not encounter a single border. You could settle where you want. You could work where you want. You could be where you want. There was no iqama. There was no visa. There was no border. There was no, xenophobia. None of that existed because Islam forbid all of that. So in the actual implementation of Islam, none of these things really exist. Or if they do emerge, there's always, a jurisprudence to explain how to manage those things when people have a focal point of Islam and what Islam says about these things, not what the post-colonial subdivisions, of borders say within, their border. This is our law and this is what you do in our country, and come here, but you have to have a karma. You can't own land, you can't get married, you can't do this. I got married in Saudi Arabia. I had to get married in a courtroom. I wasn't allowed to go to the Kaaba and get married in a mosque because I was a foreigner, ajnabi. I had to go in and get married in a courtroom, and there was a man sitting behind me in my wedding in handcuffs, waiting to be heard in front of the Qadi before my wedding.
Oh gosh. Well,
it was disgusting. And when you think about that, that is how far removed we are from actual implementation of Islam. So all of these things, like what the sister was mentioning about her experiences and so on, is as a consequence of us and our failings as an ummah to be able to implement Islam in its entirety. Our inability to be able to do that allows the kuffar to come and do what they do. It allows the Zionists to come and subdivide us and weaponize the far right against us. It allows all these hostilities to come upon us without having any means to defend ourselves. All of this is a consequence of our inability to implement true Islam amongst ourselves.
Yes, you've just thrown me back to my wedding, which was I was married in the TV studios at Islam Channel, and the TV sheikh at the time, it was Faisal Bodhi, wonderful brother, mashallah. And it always makes me smile because during our service, I was asked 3 times, do you want to marry this man? Because people who don't understand Islam will talk about things, women are forced into marriage. And I was asked 3 times, do you want to marry this man? And I thought, if he asks me a 4th time, I'm going to say, why? What have you heard about him? I just, it was like really, there's so much common sense in Islam, but so much nonsense that are made up by our detractors who have no idea about Islam. And of course, the wedding or the marriage is it's a business contract, and it's very practical, and unemotional in a lot of ways, and I remember drawing up my own wedding contract, and of course, you know, in Hollywood they're paying millions of dollars to lawyers to draw up prenuptial weddings and agreements. And these were rolled out in Islam 1400 years ago. In fact, it was the rights bestowed on women that made me realize, you know, that this religion, far from oppressing women, is very liberating towards women. And we just, I often tell women, we have to know our Islam, and then the best way of challenging misogyny or chauvinism is to roll out something from the Quran, because I don't think that there is a man alive who would challenge the word of God. And so it's, well, we've come through quite a few links there, but I found Islam to be incredibly liberating. And I found the Quran to be a blueprint, a way of life, a great way of life, especially for women who want to be empowered, which might seem crazy when you think the trigger for my conversion was in a prison cell in Afghanistan. And I'd been arrested by the Taliban for sneaking into Afghanistan. It was a time of war, and I remember watching the Taliban up close, and I noticed that every single thing that they did was an act of faith. Walking into the prison cell and saying Bismillah before they would sit down and start the interrogation, they would say a prayer. Their clothes were Islamic, you know, right to the point of, and I've seen these discussions and it drives me crazy, where brothers discuss what is the correct length for trousers. Is it above the ankle? Is it grazing the ankle? Is it below the ankle? And there's all sorts of really heated discussions going on. But just watching the Taliban made me realize that Islam, of which I knew nothing about, is a way of life. It's how you eat, how you sleep, how you conduct yourself. And it was a real eye-opener for me as a journalist. And I realized that if I am to report on the Muslim world, I need to know about this faith to be able to report with any accuracy about what is happening in the Muslim world. And this is something that a lot of journalists understand, because, you know, they've taken it upon themselves to start reading the Quran to find out more about what makes Muslims tick. And of course, you know, take the situation that we're in at the moment with Iran, and the Americans are still accusing the Iranians of having ambitions for nuclear weapons. And of course, this is an absolute nonsense. After the first Ayatollah Khomeini I think it was he who issued the fatwa that nuclear weapons were evil and were haram, and Iran would never produce or own or have a nuclear weapon. And the Americans wouldn't come up with the nonsense that they're coming up with if they understood this, if they understood the seriousness of a fatwa, and how once a fatwa has been issued, it can't be pulled back or changed. So yes, so the inspiration in a bizarre sort of way for me was the Taliban. Of course, the Taliban were delighted when they heard I'd converted to Islam, and they often take full credit for it. But their behavior made me realize that that Islam is a blueprint, it's a code for living. And I have to laugh when I see all these far-right nutters running around saying, oh, they're going to bring Sharia law into the country. And the thing is, Sharia law is already here. And they don't realize it. You know, having halal meat is an adherence to Sharia law. When I got married, as I say in the Islam channel, it was a Sharia compliant wedding. The way that we dress, the way that we behave, the observing the law of the land. It's all part of the Sharia, and it does make me laugh when our enemies turn round and in hysteria to say, oh, they're going to bring in Sharia. And it's like, no, that was done years ago.
Yeah, I think, Yvonne, it's important to understand as well that Sharia law is the foundation of English common law. So
Yes.
if you go back historically to the medieval period, let's go back to the beginning of the medieval period. You got the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta, what is it, 11th century or 11th century, something like that, 12th century. King John. So this is during the Crusades. King John's brother Richard is fighting in the Crusades. He's over trying to take Jerusalem. He's fighting Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Salahuddin saved his life, at which point he refused to fight Salahuddin, and that's why he came home. Whilst he was here, the feudal behavior of his brother King John had resulted in them forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta, establishing some basic human rights for people such as habeas corpus. If you arrest someone, you have to produce the body. You have to say, this person's under arrest. Prior to that, he would just disappear into a dungeon and no one would even know what had happened to them. So really, between the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights, there was very little in the way of protections for people in this country. But after the Moors in Spain, from the time of Tariq ibn Ziyad in the 7th century AD through to 1482 and the fall of Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella, when they did the Reconquista and they took back Spain and Portugal from the Muslims, drove them back into Africa. That period, the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, that civilization that was brought to Europe, who'd lost its civilization from the Greeks and the Romans, that had long gone. It was feudal Europe. It was medieval Europe. They'd been in the Dark Ages prior to that. They had no such legal framework. So the laws of contract, for instance, that when you contract a deal, you write it down, you bring someone, this is from Surat al-Baqarah, you bring someone to witness it. The laws of equity, is it just and equitable to do this? These basic principles, these basic common law principles, which are now ingrained in the British Constitution, were derived from Muslim Spain. So therefore, the Sharia law provided the entire foundation for contemporary English common law. That's before you start talking about how Muslims here in this country are able to do Islamic stuff. And you know, much of that is done under the, you know, the Jews do it under the laws of arbitration and so on in this country. But the principles that underpin it have their origins in Muslim Spain. And between the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights, all of that legal jurisprudence was brought to Britain and ingrained within the Constitution. So they have the Muslim world to thank for that, but they've long forgotten the Islamic contribution, and they're running scared of Sharia law like it's coming to get them, not realizing that it's Sharia law that's actually protecting them. Otherwise, they'd be in the same situation as they were before King John signed the Magna Carta.
Well, I'll let you break the news to Tommy Robinson rather than me, but I see that Mars has her hand up, or her...
Oh, yes, on the thingamajig. And I was just going to add that, you know, even now, surprisingly, there is a bank that offers Sharia compliant mortgages here in the UK. And the people that are taking advantage of it are non-Muslims, actually. So we know that, you know, you have some, there is a minority, but quite persuasive in saying things like, oh, Sharia law, they're taking over and all of those kinds of things. But actually, there are loads of things out there, services out there that are Sharia compliant that non-Muslims are actually in agreement and actually would rather do it than a conventional mortgage. That's all I was gonna add.
Yes. Oh gosh. Well, that will certainly stir up a lot of debate in the far right. But I was talking about women's rights before, Mars, and I just wondered if the rights bestowed upon Muslim women had impacted on your decision to convert to Islam.
I think for me, I didn't really look at it in that way. I suppose I'm quite a holistic person. I go by what I feel and just go. I didn't even look at that until very later stage. And just like you, it's this whole blueprint of living. I love how Islam just gives you that guidance, right? And how you would live. And for me, that worked. And I always say this to people that talk to me, especially when I put the hijab on. A lot of them thought that, you know, I'm not, are we still friends? And I'm like going, well, yes, we are. I just literally added something else on my head, but that's it. I'm still Mars. I'm still the same person that, you know, you enjoy having a coffee with. I'm still that person that likes to have a laugh and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, so I wouldn't say like it was directly that got me into it, but it really was more about the lifestyle. And that really just worked well with me.
Yes. Of course, at the moment, we're in the period of the World Cup, and it would be remiss of me, Malik, not to mention the influence, the positive influence that Mo Salah has had on the Muslim community in Liverpool and among ordinary football fans who've even incorporated in their chants that the upside of being a Muslim. How important is that, or influential has that been in Liverpool?
I mean, every time you have an influential figure who professes a position, whether that's a political position, a religious position, or even a brand, then people will gravitate towards that because of that person. I mean, if you think about it, you guys have all got media backgrounds, you know how branding works. You know, if you get someone positioning a product next to a brand, people will buy the product because of the brand association. So if you consider that, I'm not diminishing Islam to a brand, I'm just saying in terms of the mentality of people, of how they associate this with that, A with B. So when you see someone presenting a negative perspective on Islam and behaving in a negative manner, then that has a tendency then to reflect badly on the faith, even though it's only the behavior of an individual. And similarly, when you have someone making a positive contribution to the point where people, come to love that person for what they do or how they behave, conduct themselves, or so on, or perform in the case of someone like Mo Salah, then that association becomes a kind of a very positive kind of clarion call towards the thing that he represents. So in the case of Mo Salah, when people talking about, chants where, I'll be Muslim too, and just ordinary everyday kind of Scousers saying that was something which was very distinctive, because I'd never heard anything like that pertaining to a religion before with any other footballer prior to Mo Salah. And he just stood out. And I think a lot of it had to do with not just the way he played. He was exemplary in the way he played and still does. He was committed to his country, and he played for his national team as well in Egypt in the African Cup of Nations. But in Liverpool, he became an absolute hero. They were calling him Prince of Egypt and all this kind of stuff. He became a sort of symbol of the greatness of the club within the city, and that just endeared a lot of people and made people think about him in ways that they wouldn't normally think about a footballer. And one of the things that came up during the kind of tenure of the manager Jurgen Klopp was that he would stop practice to allow Mo Salah and Sadio Mane, who was Senegalese, to pray. And the players came to understand that, yeah, we're all doing this thing and we're training and it's important, this is what we do, but he has to pray. This is prayer time, he has to pray. They gave dispensation for them when it was Ramadan, when they had to fast. So, people started to go to the match who were Muslims, and sometimes they'd go into the stairwells and they'd be praying, and people would respect the fact that they were praying on the stairwells because Mo Salah prayed. So these kinds of things become really positive signaling, if you like, in a sort of an otherwise hostile environment. Now, that's not to say that there's not hostility against Islam in Liverpool. We've seen that with Tommy Robinson bringing his people down here. But Liverpool's always been a kind of a very, I don't know, it's kind of a rebel rousing kind of bunch down here. A lot of them were from Ireland, from the Irish potato famine, and a lot of the Irish are sort of anti-imperialists. People say we're Scousers, we're not English. They would treat it quite differently. And there's been a real move by the far right to try and really crack Liverpool, to try and make Liverpool be this racist thing that they want it to be. And they've always been met with an anti-fascist kind of backlash that's been disproportionate to the kind of fascist element. So they found little enclaves now in the north of Liverpool where they've been able to do their little riots and stuff like that. The kind of agent provocateur that Tommy Robinson likes to do on behalf of his paymasters in Israel. And that's been, it's more of a kind of come down, ship them in from outside into Liverpool, create a furore, get some headlines and leave, and then make Liverpool people think that there's a thing going on that they need to gravitate towards. But when you've got someone like Mo Salah, who week after week is just, perpetuating this positive image of Islam, there's a counterweight to it. So, the far right coming here, wants a blue moon trying to stir up stuff versus someone like him who's become, a real sort of major figurehead within the city. I think it's a good counterweight, if you like, to that kind of thing. And I've got a lot of I'm not a mad football fan like some people are, but I did sort of have an origin in football associated with me. There was a black footballer called Andrew Watson, who was his mother was born enslaved in Demerara in Guyana, and his father was a white Scottish sugar merchant and enslaver, and they had this mixed race child brought into England in the 1850s, 1859, and by the 1880s, this guy captained the Scottish national side, and he's now regarded as the world's first black international footballer. And my name was Mark Watson. This is my book of poetry by Mark T. Watson, Ordinary Guy. And that's before I converted to Islam. I wrote my poetry under that name. And my father was from Guyana as well. So I'm trying to find out, am I linked to this guy? Because there were pictures of him, he looked like me. And that was the foundation of me trying to trace my ancestry back through slavery and colonialism, based on the story of this incredible black footballer who came from Scotland to England in 1881 and thrashed England 6-1 at the Oval, and actually used a form of the game that we play today, what they call now the passing and running game. He invented that. So he was known as the Scotch professor, and he came to England to teach the English how to play. The English used to grab the ball, charge to the other end, and it was just, there was no technical skills involved. Andrew Watson brought technical skills to the game. So he's now being regarded as one of the architects of the game. So when you consider me growing up in the 70s and the football being so polarized in terms of the racial violence and the National Front and the British movement, and they really used the terraces to promote their Sieg Heil and the Nazi chants and so on. And it was actually one of my ancestral cousins who was one of the architects of the very game that they play. It kind of helped me to reassert my kind of cultural identity and my right to football, because at one point, black people in this city were literally driven out of football because of the presence in the 1970s of the far right on the terraces. So I think Mo Salah has had a huge impact in kind of reversing that. When John Barnes first came to play for Liverpool, they were throwing bananas onto the pitch and all that kind of stuff, and he had to deal with that on a weekly basis as Liverpool's first black player. But Mo Salah did a huge amount to change that. So, as a Muslim, showing that he was devout in his religion, he would bring his wife and children onto the pitch. His wife wore hijab. As I say, they would stop practice to pray and these kinds of things. It made people think about the religion in different ways. And because they respected Mo Salah, they came to respect Islam.
Now, then, you were waving a book there, and you so quickly I didn't get to see the title. So if you want to,
so this is Ordinary
can you
Guy.
tell me a little bit about the book?
So this is Ordinary Guy by Mark T. Watson. This is my name before I reverted to Islam. So this is a book of poetry that I wrote when I was teaching myself to become literate under the guidance of the activist and poet Gil Scott-Heron. So it's just a small book of 33 poems. So that was the sort of corpus that I developed while I was trying to become literate so I could go to university. When Gil died in 2011, I wrote this book. So this is a very young me next to Gil Scott-Heron. This is called Letters to Gil. It's a bit more of a thick book. This is published by HarperCollins. And that came out in 2021. This talks in detail about my conversion to Islam and how, I started off seeking the truth through my journey with Gil, how I came to meet the last poets and how the last poets brought me to the faith of Islam. But it also talks about my journeys around the world, what I found, the geopolitical situations that were going on, and how I ended up, sort of suing Liverpool City Council and winning my case. And then the third one is the one that's just come out, another bit thicker than the previous one. It's called Searching for My Slave Roots. This is Malik Al Nasir, obviously now, my Muslim name. And this is a plantation in Demerara in Guyana, where, my father cocaine as a young man on a plantation of this firm called Sandbach Tinney & Co. from Liverpool, who made an absolute fortune from enslaving people in Guyana and the Caribbean and from the sugar industry. And they actually built the city of Liverpool and many of its institutions from the proceeds of enslavement in the Caribbean. And this book details not just my journey to find who these people were and how they related to me. There's a chapter in here on the footballer Andrew Watson as well. But also he was part of the family that enslaved his grandmother and his mother, and also that enslaved my ancestors, and he's an ancestral cousin of mine. So I kind of unpick in this book those colonial legacies of this. We're talking about these guys built the Liverpool Royal Institution, which spawned what is today the University of Liverpool and John Moores University and the School of Tropical Medicine. They spawned a whole range of other institutions as well, including the Liverpool-Manchester Railway, the very first commercial
And
railway.
presumably we can get the books
Yeah,
easily.
everywhere. This is coming out in paperback in August. The hardback version is already out. It's published by HarperCollins. So it's available everywhere, Waterstones and Google Books.
And I notice on your first book that you used your birth name and that you were given the name Malik by Jalal Nuruddin,
That's correct.
of the Last Poets. So why did you change your name?
So when I wrote that poetry, I was Mark Watson. So even though I published it in 2004, I became Muslim in 1992, I felt that that body of work belonged to the entity that I was when I was in my kind of pre-Islamic period. It was part of my journey, as it were. So I published it under Mark T. Watson. As far as the name is concerned, one of the things that Jalal explained to me was that on the Day of Judgment, that a person will be called before Allah by the name by which they were best known in the dunya, in the life of this world. So he said to me, "What would you want to be called on the Day of Jay?" Watson was like, some slave master's name. Mark is some Christian name. Like, would you want to be known by those names? And I was like, I started to think about it and I pondered on it, and it was really started to disturb me a lot, that I'm carrying a slave master's name and I'm carrying this Christian name and I'm no longer a Christian. So I said to him, well, how would I go about getting a name? And he said, you're a person who's been very much involved in the service of people. I'd worked in the service sector. I used to work in hotels and restaurants, and I was always serving people. And I continued in that. I used to enjoy serving people. It was a thing that I liked to do. And he said, so how would you like to be the servant of the king? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the king's servant is someone like they get respect, they would be treated with dignity, and how you've always been mistreated by people that you served, worked on the ship, used to serve the officers, they treated you like a dog, they called you names, what if you could go somewhere and still serve but be treated with dignity and respect? So I said, what would that be? And he said, well, Al-Malik is the king and Allah is Al-Malik, he's the king of kings. So, you could be Abdul Malik, and that would be the servant of the king or the slave of the king. So we said, how would you prefer to be known? So when I thought about it, I thought, oh, alhamdulillah, that sounds good. So I decided to call myself Abdul Malik. So for a while, I was calling myself Abdul Malik Watson because I didn't have a second name. And it was again in my sort of desire to serve. Whenever I used to see people coming to Liverpool, you'd see tourists with maps trying to find their way around. I'd always stop what I was doing and go and help them to get to where they were going. It was just a thing I did. And there was this one group of black artisans who had been brought over to Liverpool from New Orleans, and they were actually going around the city doing a variety of different things. They had some photographers, they had sculptors, they had authors, they had poets, they had theatrical performers. It was just a group of them, and they'd come from this center in New Orleans, like an art center, and they'd come to Liverpool on a kind of exchange program. And I saw them on the streets and I thought, these guys look cool, really interesting. They were dressed differently and, black people from somewhere else. So I went over and introduced myself to them, asked them what they were doing. They were trying to, get somewhere. I helped them to get where they were going. And then I invited them back to my house for some food and I fed them. So I came to know them, and over the preceding weeks, or succeeding weeks, I ended up spending quite a bit of time with them. So then it came time for them to leave and go back to New Orleans. And they had a guy called Josh, who was a Christian, who led the group. Some of the group were very much into traditional African religions, Obeah, things like that. Others were, because New Orleans, it's quite, it's a bit witchy down in New Orleans. So these guys, some of them were non-religious, some of them were Christians. So this guy, Josh, I said to them, when you're leaving, come to the house, I'm going to cook some food for you before you go. So they all came to my house on the day before they were leaving. I cooked a nice spread for them, gave it to them. And then Josh asked me the question. He said, what is it with your name? And, where did you get the name? So I explained to him how I got my name. And he said, well, what about your surname? What are you going to do about your surname? And I said, well, the name that you have in Islam should reflect something in your character or your personality and be a name by which you would wish to be called on the Day of Judgment. So he said, well, if you find a name that means a helper to mankind, he said, that's your name. And then they left and I never saw them again. Okay. But about a year later, I was just thumbing through a book of names and I came across Al Nasir, and it said, a friend to the righteous and a helper to mankind. And I said, that's my name. And that's how I got the name Abdul Malik Al Nasir.
Well, I know that, yes. Well, I'm looking at your name, Mars, and I thought that was a name from Roman mythology.
Well, it's actually like Mariam. It's Mary. So it wasn't really far. So I didn't really have to change my name because it's like Maria. But Mars, actually, interestingly, the reason why it was called Mars was it was actually a bullying name. When I was like 10 years old, I was a lot fairer amongst the kids that I was at school with when I was in the Philippines. And they used to call me Marshmallow because they said, oh, you're white and fluffy. So they used to call me Marshmallow. It got a bit of a mouthful, no pun intended. So they started reducing it, shortening it to Marsh, and then it became Mars. Then I thought, I'm gonna embrace it because it sounds quite cool. So when I moved to another school, I started introducing myself as Mars, and goodness knows how many years in, 30 odd years in, I'm just Mars.
It's I know that a few people have said to me, why haven't you changed your name? And why haven't you picked a Muslim name? And I've said, well, there's no such thing as a Muslim name. The companions didn't change their name. So this was my reasoning. I'm sticking with, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I've had this name all my life. So when I got to Pakistan, I was constantly asked, why haven't you changed your name? Why haven't you changed your name? And as I said, when I took my Shahada, I was given a name, and it was a beautiful name, and it was Mariam. And I said, until I feel strong enough to be able to live up to such a great name, I'll just stick with Yvonne. So the next time I went to Pakistan, there was a big reception for me in the airport, and there was welcome Sister Mariam. And they have just decided that this is my name and this is what I'm going to be called. And so I'm known as Mariam in Pakistan. But as I say, I've still kept my birth name, and it's unlike yours, Mark, which could be seen as a name of the disciple. There's no religious attachment to Yvonne, as far as I've been able to ascertain. So, I've hung on to plain old Yvonne. I think that there are questions for us, and maybe our hosts can let us know. It's just I'm not quite sure. Oh gosh, I'm going to show myself up now as a real technophobe. I'm not quite sure how to access any of the questions. Mars, you're a bit of a techie.
I was going to say, I can't see any of the questions now.
Yvonne, we're at the end of our panel, mashallah. What a riveting conversation we had.
I got due to connection issues, but I just saw some really nice comments.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I mean, I feel as though we could go on for, a lot longer. And but there's our I don't know what to call you, our webmaster
Moderator.
Oh gosh. My daughter despairs of my lack of knowledge on all of these things, and yes. So anyway, do we have any questions from our audience?
I can't see any questions after I asked people to put anything, any more comments or anything in.
Well, if we go
we
back
are
to the
coming-
subject of books, Mars, you've got a book out or coming out, haven't you?
Oh, I haven't got one out. I am working on one. It's going to be a children's book, Bismillah. So yes, that's all I can say for it at the moment.
Oh, well, we look forward to seeing that. Gosh, my screen just went really weird there, and I have a book on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is coming out in paperback shortly. It was an academic book, but I don't know why it is that academic books have got such a ridiculous price tag. But the hardback version is something like 50, 60 pounds, most of which I never see. So don't waste any money by buying it. Wait for the paperback to come out. But it's an interesting one because I wrote it more for converts to Islam and people who are interested in Islam. And it tackles all of the negativity around our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him. And it answers a lot of hard questions that people find difficult to answer. And I think it was Malik who mentioned the Renaissance in Europe. And there's a whole chapter on how Muslims really influenced the Renaissance in Europe. And we've got the far right turning around saying, "Oh, we're being invaded." Well, here's some news for them. The Muslims invaded Europe centuries ago, and this is and they introduced the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, and Europe was in the Dark Ages when the Muslims came in and picked up the continent and introduced street lighting and mathematics and geometry, and civilization as we know it. So there's a lot of so this is one of the things that I wanted to put right. And as I say, there's a whole chapter on Islamic influence in Europe, but most of it is about our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, and the influence that he has had. Even those who are critical towards him can't deny the fact that he is probably the single most named individual, recognized individual in the world today. And that is quite a testament for a man who came from the Saudi Peninsula or the Arabian Peninsula. So so I'm hoping that the book will be published before the end of the year, and I'll see if we can get our titles up on the MACFEST website, because the festival is all about celebrating the arts and the literature of Muslims. So and to all of those who've been listening in today, thank you so much for supporting MACFEST, because it really is something that as Muslims we should be very proud of and celebrate. And, you know, if it continues to get the right sort of support, I think that it will become a jewel in the British Muslim community. So, yes.
Thank you, Yvonne. Can I just quickly ask, what's the title of the book?
It's called Muhammad, Don't Shoot the Messenger.
Okay, because I've just found the link. There is a description on Amazon. There's only hardcover available, but I'm putting it in the chat for anybody interested. You can just go and take a look.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would recommend them to wait for the paperback, because I'm hoping to persuade my new publisher to publish it for less than £10. You know, Islam.
That would be great.
Well, yes, it's just, you know, Islam should be accessible to everyone. And as I say, you know, I want more people to know about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, just an amazing, inspirational individual.
Okay, so thank you to everyone. Yvonne, thank you for fantastic hosting. It was an honor to meet you, to listen to all your stories, actually. Absolutely fantastic panel. It feels like we've got a theme this year on MACFEST, where we've got events that are telling and showing the truth, actually, things that, you know, that they're not sold as such on the media, and you know, people can be under a completely different impression with all the misconceptions and misinformation and disinformation. And it's been shown in many ways earlier this year on events about architecture, about the heritage, Muslim heritage in Italy, for example. All these events have been recorded. You can watch them on MACFEST YouTube channel. And for those who would like to join us again, we've got more fascinating events coming up. For example, we've got on Sunday, 5th of July, University's global event on sustainability and environment. And then, and listen to this, on Sunday, 12th of July, we've got an event about the 12th century novel. So that might be absolutely fascinating. Another one. You cannot miss it. As usual, you just go on Eventbrite and register for the free tickets. And for today, thank you again to everyone.
Thank you, Katarzyna, from me. And above all, thank you to our amazing panelists. I'm lost for words. The conversation has been a real feast for us, absolutely riveting. From the bottom of my heart, I really want to thank you for sharing your world, your stories, your experience and your knowledge, and you worked beautifully together. Really, really delighted that we've hosted you. We loved listening to you, and I'm sure all the attendees have expressed that in all the little chat here. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Yvonne. Fantastic hosting. You kept the conversation going. Thank you, Mars, for your personal experience, and especially that moment where you broke down. You poor girl. Our heart was with you. And Malik, my goodness, what an amazing background you've been having, and all the contribution as a male. That was really valuable for us.
Thank you so much.
For our attendees who joined us on a Sunday afternoon, sunny day, which is very difficult when people normally want to go out and enjoy themselves. So thank you, everybody. And thank you to Katarzyna, been hosting us from behind the scenes. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. See you, inshallah, next week, next Sunday.
Salam.
Walaikum salam. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.